Hello, everyone. I am Siddiqa Tib, and Laura, Laura, are you sharing your screen so that everyone can see it? And can everyone see the Laura's presentation?
I'm sharing, but if it's bounced off, I'll do it quickly again. It's not a problem.
Okay.
Do it this way. Can you see it now?
Perfect on my side. So I am Siddiqa Tib. I will be facilitating today's webinar series. I'd like to thank you for joining us today at the National Biodiversity Assessment 2025 webinar series. This is the fourth webinar series, and we hope you will join us again. Okay. I would like to state that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on SANBI's YouTube channel. For today's webinar, I will give a short overview of what the NBA is, and then I will hand over to Laura van Niekerk as the main speaker for today's topic. Next slide, please.
Sorry. Oops, sorry.
The National Biodiversity Assessment is very complex and covers many aspects of biodiversity. The levels of assessment are ecosystems, species, and more recently, genetic diversity. In ecosystems, we assess all of South Africa's 980 ecosystem types: the terrestrial realm on land, the freshwater realm made up of our rivers and wetlands, the estuarine realm where rivers meet the sea, and our marine realm. In addition, we specifically focus on assessing the cross-realm coastal zone, where we bring together terrestrial, freshwater, and estuarine and marine data. Last but not least, we assess our sub-Antarctic territory, which has substantial marine territory and two small but important islands. We are very proud to be the first country to assess all our ecosystems across all realms using the Red List of Ecosystem Frameworks of the IUCN. Partners for this work on ecosystems is very important. The Institute for Coastal and Marine Research at Nelson Mandela University leads the coastal component, and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research leads the estuarine component. For species, we are a world leader in this field. With the national Red List dating back 40 years. We have applied the IUCN Red List of threatened species categories and the criteria to 15 full taxonomic groups, with 3 new groups assessed for the first time in the NBA: freshwater crabs, fairy shrimps, and spiders. We do this with multiple partners contributing to or leading on the assessments of specific taxonomic groups. For example, the Endangered Wildlife Trust leads the Mammal Red List, BirdLife South Africa the Bird Red List, and so on. Genetic diversity underpins all biological diversity, playing a key role in individual fitness, an organism's ability to survive and reproduce, species' ability to adapt to changing environments, and overall ecosystem resilience. Yet indicators for this aspect of biodiversity are just being developed, and perhaps not surprisingly, South Africa is once again at the forefront, piloting these indicators and reporting on them in the NBA. Next slide, please. These efforts build on a wealth of publications and existing resources, result in a range of NBA products, principally a book that you can download, and for the very first time, for this NBA, a website with 108 web pages and thousands of images and plots and maps. Regular updates of the NBA via the website are now possible by the NBA team themselves. The data science skills we have built over the last 4 years have allowed us to take a huge step towards a living national biodiversity assessment, and we'll use this momentum to improve our biodiversity monitoring systems in general. Next slide, please. All of this, being at the front of biodiversity assessment, requires constant innovation and problem solving with few global examples to follow. It also requires collaboration in South Africa and with international scientists and institutions. This brings us to a really key aspect of the NBA. It is clearly an enormous undertaking. NBA 2005 was a collaboration effort from more than 490 contributors representing approximately 110 institutions. It took approximately 23,000 person days of work over 6 years. It requires a great deal of facilitation from a leadership team and the quite amazing goodwill and interest of our partners in making this a useful product and process. So we thank you for all involved. This is a product of the whole biodiversity sector of South Africa. I'm now going to hand over to our main speaker today. Over to you, Laura van der Kerk.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be taking you through the estuary realm findings and also talk a little bit about the way forward in the future and some of our challenges for estuaries. To save bandwidth, I'll just put my camera off. Okay, so South Africa's got roughly about 290 estuaries and about 42 microestuaries, and we've classified them into 22 estuarine ecosystem types and 3 microestuary types. We've not really focused on the microestuaries because our true estuaries are actually challenging enough. Our estuary supports over 100,000 hectares of estuarine-associated plant species, which is about 180 of them, the majority of which is in our salt marshes. We've got about 150 estuarine-associated fish species, 50 of them Southern African endemics, and 20 of them exclusively into South African waters. And with a few species basically associated with a handful of estuaries. So this is very special. Knysna seahorse, 3 estuaries, Bot River clipfish, only 2 estuaries, estuarine pipefish was 5 estuaries, now only 2 estuaries. And we've got about 35 bird species that is seen as dependent on estuaries, with 14% of them seen as threatened. And from our previous calculations, roughly about 265,000 birds lost since the 80s from our estuaries. So as you can see, huge amount of biodiversity associated with estuaries, but also to make clear that they provide us with a host of benefits. They're seen as super ecosystems. They basically comprise only 2% of our territory, but they bring in roughly about 4 billion rand per annum to our coastal economy, recreation, tourism, livelihoods, marine fisheries. But also from previous work done, we know that we've lost roughly about 700 million rand per annum in ecosystem services due to the way we've planned our developments. And going forward, we need to think hard about development and resource use and how we will balance equitable sharing of the benefits with productive ecosystems. It also here on the side picture, I'm highlighting 2 of our key ecosystem services that's become a common communicating tool for us: blue carbon habitats, salt marsh, mangroves, and seagrass, and also estuarine nursery function, with supporting a host of our marine resources. I'm going to highlight some of the key pressures on our estuaries and why we are where we are today. We've lost about 1/3 of the fresh water flowing into our coast. It's been reduced from about 36,000 to 25,000 million cubic meters per annum, with 22% of our estuaries under severe freshwater reduction impacts. These are largely from dams, run-of-river abstraction, and small farm dams. So in the NBA, we have basically assessed where the bulk of the pressures are and on which systems they rest. Another key concern for the estuaries realm is pollution pressure. With nearly a third of our estuaries now under severe pollution pressure, we've got about 655 million litres of wastewater flowing into our systems. We've got harmful algae blooms that's developed in about 18% of our estuaries now. The main culprits are municipal wastewater, agricultural return flow, and urban stormwater. And we're starting to see change at regional scales occurring in our systems. We need an integrated catchment to coast management interventions to basically mitigate for our cascading impacts of pollution and HABs on our biodiversity and ecosystem service. So this is one of our key concerns moving forward. And then another one that's really come in this last NBA is fishing pressures. One of the major increases that we've seen between the 2018 assessment, in fact, since 2012 and 2011, 15% of our estuaries were under severe pressure. In 2018, it was 21%, and at present, it's about 28%. And by area, we move from 75% of our estuarine extent to 85% of our estuarine extent now under severe fishing pressure. Is this to do with, to some degree, the opening up of some of our marine protected areas? But a lot of it between the previous assessment and now is because of the online availability of cheap gill nets from Timo, Takealot, and Shein, which has really made or escalated this fishing pressures, especially in KZN and the Wild Coast, that we're seeing our larger systems under pressure. But I'd be remiss not to point out that we've also had some responses here. With the compliance success at the moment from monitoring data, 80% of the nets are getting retrieved before they've caught anything. And for every 39 fish being caught, 21 are actually being released alive. So this is talking to social networks and a massive compliance effort in KZN. And DFF is also launched the gill netting app to help understand it. So that type of analysis is basically based on real-time data at the moment. Land use and development pressures, also about 22% of estuaries. Basically, warm and cool temperate estuaries are the most affected, followed by the subtropical region. Agriculture is responsible for most of it, with some urban development. And then another creeping concern for us is mining, sand mining, diamond mining, and heavy mineral mining, with nearly half of KZN estuaries being impacted by mining activities. So we really need to look at how we can mitigate for this, and it's across estuary types and ecosystems. So it wasn't specifically targeting something. Artificial breaching. About 16% of estuaries are subjected to artificial breaching, but unfortunately, the most of these are large systematic estuarine lakes. So that means about 60% of our total estuarine area is subjected to artificial breaching. And then also something that we're trying to keep our eye on is biological invasion pressure. There's two categories here, alien and extralimital fish, with about a quarter of our estuary, 25% subjected to it. We've got 22 species that's been recorded in estuaries or just above the estuaries, with 1 to 9 species per system being recorded. And about a third of our estuaries also have invasive terrestrial plants in them, and about nearly 10% of them aquatic invasives. So we've been trying to keep a handle on this. Often, especially in the case of the fish, there's not much we can do about it except trying to manage the influx and the vectors. So that brings us to the estuary condition. And so we go and amalgamate all those pressures, and then we basically bring them together to understand the overall estuary conditions. Here, blue colors means good condition, brown colors means poor condition or degraded. And the size of the bubble in the map on the top, you can see these maps on the NBA website as well, indicates the size of the estuary. And so we find that although 60% of our estuaries by numbers are relatively healthy, it actually makes up only 24% of our extent. That's because most of the good condition estuaries are actually small systems. More than 60% of our habitat is actually significantly modified, compromising ecological processes and also our benefits. And unfortunately, between 2018 and now, we're seeing our natural condition has declined by 11%, and the extent of heavily modified estuarine areas have increased by 13%. So that shows us that we're still basically slipping in condition. We've reapplied the IUCN red listing criteria, the new twin conditions, and we've also standardized some of the philosophies across the realms. So, but still, even with these changes, we're still finding estuaries one of the most threatened ecosystem types in South Africa. In terms of total estuarine area, 99% of our area falls in a threatened category, with 1% critically endangered, 72% endangered, and 26% vulnerable. And if we do it by type, we end up with 91% of our types endangered, 5% critical, 41% endangered, and 45% vulnerable. So you can see, because of the amount of pressures, it's only the very small types that's actually okay. And most of our larger types are basically in one of the threatened categories, with cool, temperate, and subtropical types being the most at risk of collapse. Most threatened types are estuarine bays, estuarine lakes, large fluvially dominated systems, our large temporary open and closed estuaries, and then our arid, predominantly closed little systems on the west coast of South Africa. We also did an evaluation of our protection levels, and here again, there's been some method change here, because we've standardized our philosophy for protection across the different realms. We did a back calculation as well, so that one can compare the previous assessment with the current assessment. But the message, even we haven't really increased our protection since 2018. In fact, we've had some erosion of protection because we've lifted no-take restrictions in some of our MPAs and allowed for commercial fishing. But nevertheless, if we take the distribution of protected areas and where they're occurring and the types there are, we're seeing that about 80% of our types have some representation in our protected area networks. But unfortunately, many of those estuaries are actually in a very poor condition. So the net result is that only 1% of our extent and 2% of, or 9% of our ecosystem types are well protected. And like I said, those are the small types. 9% of estuarine extent and 3 ecosystem types are not protected at all. So there's quite a bit of work still to do, and the majority of our estuarine extent is in moderately to poorly protected. But at the same time, if we look at this, we can see an immediate benefit to 22% to well protected if we just manage our fishing effects, or if it's better. We're not saying no fishing, but systems like Langebaan, Cozy, and Knysna are all representative of a single type. And so if we manage our efforts a little bit better there, we could actually see these systems advance. So that's kind of come into my restoration messaging, this idea that we have estuaries and protected areas, but they're poor condition. And that's also something we should be working on. That became one of our biggest challenges moving forward. How do we integrate estuaries into the network of protected areas? That's literally our next challenge. Between our previous assessment and this one, we had the Global Biodiversity Framework kicking in, with especially Target 2, which is restoration, and Target 3, which is protection, and increasing to 30%. But there's a whole range of other targets. There's spatial targets, a contribution to people, all of that we need to look at more comprehensively. And also to note, like I said before, in 2011, we brought out the National Biodiversity Plan, but we've seen very little movement on that. At the same time, we've done a lot of work in the last 2 decades or so on blue carbon habitats and nursery functions of climate protection and stock recovery. And this provides us with an opportunity to bring these into our priority plans. There's also a number of quick wins available in the form of just expanding on our existing PAs and MPAs and unlocking some existing declarations or things that's been in the pipeline for a long time. So there's opportunities with the doom and gloom here that we not really seeing formal protection increasing that much. One of the key things, and it's a bit of a conundrum for estuaries and why we're possibly in this situation where we're not seeing quite the movement we've seen in other realms, is that there's a host of mechanisms available to us, with marine protected areas obviously being the gold star because they also protect the living resources in the estuaries. That's the only legislation for estuaries that will allow us to protect against the impact of fishing as well. But we've also got tools and existing protected areas, nature reserves basically doing a very good job. Even though they might not have the restrictions on fishing effects, we've seen the benefits of biodiversity stewardship and working with private ownerships and traditional leaderships. And then the new kid on the block is other effective area-based conservation measures, which we're not 100% sure how it's going to look moving forward for estuaries. South Africa's just brought out their standards. And but opportunities exist, maybe in the form of the estuary management plans, if they become stronger in how they deal with biodiversity, maybe other mechanisms. One of the things that became very clear is that we need to look at our traditional, the parts of our estuaries that's under traditional leadership, especially many of our mangrove important blue carbon systems are sitting there, and that we need to look at community-based bottom-up approaches. So we need to look at new models for our protection. And all of this needs to be supported by land use, grazing and farming best practices. Ownership on or putting something in some sort of a formally declared area isn't good enough. We need to manage across the board all our pressures, many from them outside of our parks. So we're at this stage engaging with this whole platform with various degrees of uptake and how we're going to be going forward. And to be honest, at this stage, people are testing the waters like other effective conservation measures. How are we going to go about it? So it's both exciting and slightly daunting. The other message that we want to put very clearly is in target 3, it doesn't help you just protect the estuaries. You actually need to think about a source to sea approach. And here especially we're bringing out the idea of the fans and plumes of the offshore in many of our estuaries during higher flow seasons or during floods. If you think to Gela Banks, off the Orange River, parts of the Eastern Cape, Mbashi, for instance, those fans and plumes are really important. So our message here is in conservation planning, you actually need to think bigger landscape scale, which is the same language we're seeing sandbox and other conservation agencies are starting to use. Connectivity is really crucial for us. And then the idea that we need to bring our whole planning processes into the larger planning, like CBA maps. How do we bring estuary into that critical biodiversity areas? There's a whole new envisaging and revisiting of stitching estuaries and our priorities into these different tools. I would also be remiss if I don't talk about restoration. So for us, like I said before, we actually have quite a bit of estuarine estate in protected areas, but they're often in very poor condition. If we're not going to see movement on increasing the extent, which I'm still hoping because we've got some types like permanently open estuaries and very poorly protected, but also in the state we have, these things we can do to restore. We can look at water quality. That would probably be my number one thing we need to look at. Restoring river and estuarine buffers, looking at how we manage our wastewater treatment works, something like sustainable urban drainage systems, so innovative planning moving forward for cities and towns for stormwater. We needed to look at our base flows to estuary compliance, so no illegal activities, invasive alien plants in our catchments, we're already removing them. Removing structures that disconnect estuaries from their catchments. We often see that like at the top of the Kleinbroek. We need to look at restoring our degraded blue carbon habitats. That's active restoration of salt marshes, mangroves, even our reeds and sedges. Obviously, controlling and reducing fishing effort, things like the night ban, maybe seasonal closure. So that's not even through PA legislation, protected areas legislation. That's coming through the Living Marine Resources Act. Improve compliance and awareness, all will help us restore some of our functionality. Artificial breaching, that's managed through the EIA regulations, but that's a key pressure that you can restore. Many of our estuaries in protected areas has got breaching plans, and we should be optimizing those, trying for the highest levels, the best breaching practices. And then finally, harvesting and grazing pressures is a huge inside and outside protected areas. I also wanted to point out that we've done quite a bit of work in terms of understanding our restoration priorities, especially after thank Nelson Mandela here. Janine's team has done an awful lot of work mapping where our key habitats are, looking for opportunities, engaging with government. So this has also had uptake in DFFE and with some of the provinces, that the work we've done, which feeds both into the NBA, is also feeding into some national plans and trying to generate a receptive environment for restoration moving forward. And like I said before, we cannot achieve target 3 without also looking at target 2 for us. So it was very, we basically embraced the messaging of the GBF. This also speaks, I think, target 11 is climate change. So if we were to restore our blue carbon habitats, we're actually also contributing to some of our other targets, our climate readiness. I'm not going to talk in detail here, but just to remind you, for estuaries, basically, we have, we all identify with names. So we've got mangrove sites that need restoring, salt marshes that needs restoring, but also water quality. We need to think intertidal and water column habitat. We strongly believe in the polluter pays principle, like in Mhlanga, the UPL spill, and other systems where we have problems. And then obviously I've spoken about it before. Restoration also involves the gill netting and managing the fishing effort. So then coming more towards pulling it all together, we need a basket of protection mechanisms. I've liked Sandy Patterson talking about, he's with Law UCT, and he talks about layers of protection. And there's not just formal protection that matters, even though it's one of our headline indicators. But there's this whole basket of tools out there. We need a source to sea approach. So you need to manage the pressures in the catchment, but you also need to manage the pressures just outside of the estuaries. We've got all these protection mechanisms, marine protected areas, nature reserves, contract stewardships, and OSM, with some overlap between those. And we need this landscape scale tools like St. Paul talks about, envisioning it, and the opportunities protection might, formal protection might provide communities as well. So no more fences. That's never worked for estuaries. But also the complementary management interventions, the estuary management plans, the environmental flow requirements and classification from water affairs, discharge permits, which is ICM and water affairs, fisheries management plans, CBA maps, mouth management plans. So it's a multi-sector approach. We had, in the last 5 years or so, we put this exploratory with Linda Harris. I saw Linda was on the call. We did some very interesting work. You could say we did a beta version because it still needs refining and it needs consultation. But just test if our priorities, if we put this bigger landscape scale priorities together, and we don't just prioritize for marine, for rivers, for the coast and for estuaries separately, what is the overlap in protection zones and how we should go about it. So that's a big technical challenge, both technically in running this type of assessment, but also technical in the collaboration and the stakeholder consultation across realms. But that's basically where we need to go. We have to find the time and the funding to get these integrated models out there. And then follow towards the end now, I'll be very remiss if I don't talk about some of our successes as well. We've had, South Africa's got a very strong policy and legislative framework to protect and manage our estuaries. There's no doubt about it. I'm not really asking or think that there's much we can criticize in this. We've had an excellent response between 2018 and 2025. 100% of our estuaries now is classified, and the flow requirements have been determined. That was the Department of Water Affairs in consultation with other sectors and local government. We've also got around 20% of estuaries with estuary management plans in different forms, with quite a few in the pipelines. That's spearheaded by the Department of Environment Affairs and the provincial governments, but also municipalities and the conservation agencies. So we're getting better at that. But what we do need is strengthening the arrangements between sectors. We're still seeing quite a lot of sectorial focus, with especially environment, water, fishing and mining probably being the ones that mostly need to be optimizing our resource allocation. For example, we've done the flow requirements for the Sutter systems in Mlalazi, which flows into the Tugela MPA, but the water isn't quite sufficient to prevent mouth closure and the associated poor water quality. If we have a more robust intergovernment engagement around the importance of estuaries and the biodiversity, it will in future provide for a more balanced sectorial requirements being met and prevent mandate conflict, like in the case of the Mlalazi estuary at the moment. So those would be examples, and there is mechanisms. Everything isn't cast in iron, and like Rome wasn't built in a day. So we've got our frameworks, we have our platforms. It's about deepening these conversations between governments and also recognizing sometimes that this is the NBA to some degree provides you with the wish list, but the capacity and the resources to take up the wish list isn't always there. My 5-year priorities is not necessarily what the national and the provincial government can afford, but we do provide the framework to show you the trajectories. And then also, in the light of that, we know that estuary management is under-resourced in this country because I've just explained to you how complex it is, but that we need to look at more streamlined, cost-effective approaches moving forward if our intention is to go to 100% target for estuary management as well. But that was definitely one of our good news stories. So how to summarize and how I think you can get involved, we've definitely, the NBA 2025 is much more systematic. The emphasis was on repeatability, building the platforms and the R coding and the workflow. So that is there. It's also going to allow us not to have to wait 7 years. We'll actually be able to do shorter assessment, or if regional change comes in, if we do another section assessment, we can basically update things on the website now. So that's much easier for us to interface. We've aligned ourselves with the global processes much more, and also feeding into the global ecosystem topology. That will also allow us, the things we do here on the southern end of Africa, to be basically, exactly flow into the world reporting systems. Unfortunately, we're still seeing ongoing decline, the illegal gill netting, pollution, flow, coastal development, and coastal land use change, mining specifically being some of the key problems we worry about. And then for us, the next challenge was the country level information on pressures and condition is incredibly useful, and we need to figure out how to mainstream this into local estuary management and our prioritization of restoration action. So these conversations have naturally started flowing between us and the different entities to how are we going to do this now, because we've got this electronic platforms. How can we leverage it? That would be our challenge for the next 2 years, I think. A key concern is still that our data sets are very old. Some of our data sets are more than 30 years old, if I'm thinking about the fish inverts. We really do need to invest in it. And then we've got things like eDNA that can play roles. We haven't fully explored that. We really do need to work harder at putting some data, improving our data sets. Here, kudos to Ari and NMU. I know they've done a tremendous amount of work in terms of doing upkeep of their data sets, and all of it was put into the NBA. And then finally, it's also around you getting involved in your local estuarine management processes and advocating for increased protection and restoration. It needs to be a bottom-up process as well. It doesn't just help for us scientists to call for all these priority actions. if it's not vocalized, these are big needs and lots of needs out there. But we lead our local communities to be vocal about the importance of estuaries to them and the need to look after them and to be part of those decision-making processes. So estuary management also gives us the estuary forums, and there's many places and also the catchment management agencies all around the country. There's been a decentralization of some of the powers and decision-making processes. So if you're not part of one of the agencies or organized government structures, there's definitely still a need for local stakeholders to be involved, especially in the push for protection and restoration. The communities that puts up their hands first are the ones most likely to become our case studies moving forward. But yes, that would be I think that was my last slide. Yes. So thank you very much for spending some time with us this afternoon and be willing to put up with us on your Friday. And I think there's a few minutes for questions. Thank you. I can't see the chat, so if there was anything in the chat, if somebody could just read it to me, thank you.
Okay, I will read. There is 2 comments in the chat. I'll read the first one. It says, great to see the positives and the opportunities. That's from Davidine. And then Paddy Norman says, sadly, EDTEA have just approved the damming of Umzimkulo estuary. The so-called offsets are not likely to save it from severe deterioration. I'm not sure if you want to respond to those comments or to Paddy's comments.
Yes, because I actually want to know, is that the one that they're putting the weir through the top of the estuary? Because if it is, I can barely believe it. I know there was a dam planned. It's more the location that's worrying me. Estuaries is somewhat buffered. So if you think the major dams in the orange that sits 1,000 kilometers from us, we can pick up some sediments again between the dam and the estuaries. The Veilsdrift dam is being planned just above the estuary, which is seriously concerning. So if the Mbashi Dam is high up in the catchment, we are sort of buffered a little bit towards the bottom. If the dam is just above the estuary, you're also severing our connection with remember, we've got eels and things coming through estuaries into the rivers, and we depend on the estuary and the coast and the nearshore environments dependent on sediments. So that's why for the people that's not in the estuary now, well, we get very twitchy about large dams, but I didn't know it just got approved. Thank you for making my Friday.
The next one says, Jenny says that according to Dr. Ricky Taylor and Prof. Alan Whitfield, St. Lucia may be at the tipping point where it will permanently change from an estuarine lake to a freshwater coastal wetland. When this happens, South Africa will lose half of its estuarine area and St. Lucia will lose the rich biodiversity associated with the estuarine ecosystem. Is SANBI aware of this work? This is an urgent restoration priority. But I'm not sure if you want to tackle that.
Yes, so we are aware, the whole estuary community is aware of St. Lucia. And this is St. Lucia is a highly modified system. We've lost, I think it's about 20% of the flow. A big part of the problem, so it's a big system, very, very big system, and the amount of inflow is very close to the surface area of the system. In fact, the inflow is slightly below the normal size of the system. So it's super sensitive to the amount of flow it's already lost. On top of which there's canalization in the Umfolozi, which has increased the sediment close to the system because sediments can't go on to the catchment floodplains anymore. And we've also got water quality return flow, agricultural return flow in some of the main channels into St. Lucia. On top of which there's been a lot of fiddling with the mouth, and it is a system where we're struggling to determine the baseline. So St. Lucia, and the other part of it is St. Lucia naturally go through decadal cycles. So it's very hard for humans to quite visualize, like literally it could be 20 or 30 years in a wet cycle. It could be 20 years in a dry cycle. It could be open for a very long time, and then it could be closed for 10 years. And it's very, very hard to actually pinpoint exactly where it is. So St. Lucia is a very complex system, on top of which, remember, it's sitting in a World Heritage Site. So isiMangalo has also got social objectives and working with the local community there. So it's not just biodiversity objectives in the management of St. Lucia. So it's an incredibly complex problem, but we are deeply concerned with St. Lucia. It's sitting at about a D, and at times it's looked better, and at times it's looked worse in the last 10 years. So the researchers involved and between researchers, to be completely honest, we're also not on the same page. And so we're very aware of Ricky and Alan's work. And yes, and so is the park as well. So there's actually been an ongoing massive GEF restoration project there. And it's helped to some degree to alleviate some of the pressures, but it is an ongoing concern. I can't actually give you a quick answer for St. Lucia. It's another 3 webinars work to talk about the pros and cons. Every single activity we plan in St. Lucia has got both a positive and a negative consequences, just depending on which, through which lens you look. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more hands. The first one is Alice Aubrey. If you could quickly ask your question, Alice.
Thank you. I actually had a twofold question. Thank you for taking my question, though. The significance of artificial breaching, I'm ignorant about that. What is it, and why is it, why is it bad? And then also, I'm just thinking of the weather, the climate change aspects and storm surges, particularly what's happening down in Plettenberg Bay at the moment. Is that also going to cause major impact on our estuaries? Thank you.
Okay, so artificial breaching, and St. Lucia is part of the problem. That's why we say 60% of our area. Artificial breaching is when 70%, more than 70% of South Africa's estuaries, we've got a very high energy coastline, and we've actually, by global standards, got low rainfall, low runoff. And the combination of lots of energy from our coast, straight line coasts, makes that our estuaries close. In South Africa, when the estuary closes, the water level rises 1 meter to 2 meters above sea level, naturally. That's as part of the process. Backflooding into the surrounding floodplain, estuary animals go and utilize that area. In some of our estuarine lake systems especially, because it can take a long time for the estuary to build up to high water levels, people have developed in the floodplain, and over years lower and lower and lower, forcing local governments to basically artificially open the mouth before it's ready to be open. The process, what happens then is the estuary closes very quickly, because the higher the water level before a breaching, the bigger the mouth, the longer it stays open. That's the short answer. So the problem is the estuaries are open the wrong time, they close very quickly, it causes sedimentation, and in some cases can even increase your flood risk, because you've now got a lot more sediment that's accumulating over times in the mouth. And this is now in South Africa governed through the EIA regulations, but historically it wasn't. So sandparks, isiMangalo, a range of other places around the coast, you've inherited a problem, you've got approved building sites, and you have to put this intervention in place. And you have to walk a line between your responsibility to landowners and infrastructure and the ecology. And so in the case of St. Lucia, it's actually between sugarcane farming and the ecological processes. And there as well in the past that the water level wasn't allowed to go as high as we would like it to go because of the sugarcane backflooding. So it's a whole host of things, but it's basically about the connectivity of estuaries and keeping to natural cycles and processes. And then the case that humans don't like things that happen at decadal scales. We don't have the memory for that, or what happens during a flood. So this is exactly what's happened during these latest floods. on the garden route, a number of the estuaries had to be artificially popped before the time to make sure that we were not flooding houses. There was a whole host of emergency meetings, very topical at the moment, like Grootbrak, where it was open, preparation channels dug, all kinds of things to alleviate flooding of local communities. But the best thing you could do was actually in the future make sure nobody develops in the estuary floodplain. Then you don't have this risk. So this comes to the climate change story. In the climate change predictions, we are looking at more droughts, so more closures, but we're also looking at more floods. So your risk of flooding is going to go up, but people's memories are going to forget that it happens. So more severe events, but longer periods where people are not going to be at risk to remind them of it. We're also worrying about flows. Some of our drier areas, river inflows predicted to decrease. That means the estuaries will have less flow. It also means there will be stronger contention between current allocated use and the ecological conditions going forward. But on a real flood event like this, most estuarine scientists have been joyful. Estuaries need resetting events. So although a flood looks massively destructive, it's actually one of the things estuaries need. So we were not negatively, ecology wasn't negatively affected. It scoured sediments out, it took pollutants out to sea, it resetted a whole bunch of systems. So infrastructure damage, that's human, anthropogenic, ecological. We'll moan a bit about fish leaving the system for a few weeks, but post an event like this, we see a whole system resetting and tons of recruitment of baby inverts and fish coming into the system. So for us, it was actually good news, this whole flood event. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Hi, we are a little over time. Do you have time to answer one more question?
I've got time.
Okay. Yeah, okay. There's Marjolaine. Can you please unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Lara, for a very interesting presentation. I was just thinking about your source-to-sea connectivity issue that you're raising. And as you know, we're working together with SEON and developing high-resolution operational models and forecasts for the oceans around South Africa's coastline. And one thing that can be done is to simulate the motion of particles inside the water. We wouldn't be able to do it inside the river, but we could maybe release particles at the estuary, certain estuaries, and see how they move. Would such a tool or such a output be helpful for you to bring up the message? Okay, so maybe we can chat offline on that.
It's not just for us. You'll hear Linda and also Kerry talking, because part of it is understanding the whole, working towards understanding the fluvially dependent nearshore environments and protecting them. But it's also understanding the risks. So if we've got poor water quality, say something like the Ngeni going out, or where you've got aquaculture facilities, they want to basically understand if there's changes in your plume behavior, if the plume is very big, if there's a risk of contaminants, land contaminants basically coming into the sea where they're going. And a tool like that will have, you might develop it for one thing, but we would be able to use it for multiple uses, including determining environmental flows and, you know, like there's across sectors, something like that would actually be extremely useful. So yes, I'll be interested in that discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I think it's time for me to close the meeting. Thank you, Lara, for giving such a wonderful presentation, and thank you for everyone who attended the webinar. I just want to repeat that this has been recorded and it will be available on SANBI's YouTube channel. I also would like to encourage everyone to look at the NBA website and read up a bit more on estuaries and terrestrial, all the other realms. Thank you so much to everyone. And the links to the YouTube channel and the NBA website have been shared. Thank you.
Thanks, Lara and the team. Bye.
Thank you.